Welcome back to Movies TV Man. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Man. And welcome to Sunday's jam-packed edition of the DCEU Daily. We have articles to read later on and updates to give. But first of all, here's my non-spoilery review of Matt Reeves' The Batman. As you know, weeks ago, I did see a test screening. I am not going to spoil this movie. You shouldn't have this movie spoiled for you, or it will ruin the experience. I promise you about that. After my non-spoilery review, I will read out a section of a leaked review from Deadline that someone partially posted on Twitter, because that's now been deleted. Personally, I think this was leaked on purpose, but never mind. It's good to get this feel-good kind of atmosphere around this DC movie. So what did I think of The Batman? The Batman is about its characters. No character is wasted in this movie. You will feel like you know each character. The fascinating thing to me is that I watched Batman Begins last night, one of my favorite Batman films of all time, and The Dark Knight this morning, two very hugely celebrated movies, because Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is very, very good. In ways, Reeves goes further than what Nolan did. So he takes the premise that Nolan did, but he goes so deeper and so darker, and he really focuses on the characters. Now, what I think is amazing is I think it's a very ballsy, gutsy move to make a near 3-hour movie about, this CBM character, this comic book character. But it was needed. And you never feel that this is a 3-hour movie. But this is a point of view driven movie, as we've had explained to us many, many times. You will feel that you know Bruce Wayne for the first time inside and out. Now, I think this is interesting in comparison to Batman Begins, because Batman Begins is called that because it's an origin movie. This is a year 2 movie, but the origin of this character is the energy and the motivation of the film and the character. So in a way, it's doing the origin, but in a very, very different high concept way. And you really do feel for Bruce Wayne. One of the things I really noticed about the film is that, this character is not getting vitamin C. If you know what I mean, he's very pale. He kind of looks like, if you like, a vampire. He looks like he's had all the blood sucked out of him. He's definitely a recluse, and he is obsessed with his mission. And so Robert Pattinson delivers, for me, at least an Oscar-nominated performance. It's very, very good. It's a huge moment. And there is a difference when you do cast a Batman fan as Batman. There is a difference when your co-writer-director is a Batman, not a Batman fan, but a Batman stan. And you feel his knowledge, not of the later comics so much, but the early comics. And I liked that aura of Matt knowing the comics. I don't know the comics near enough as well, regrettably, as Matt Reeves. So in a way, it's an education to who this character originally was. And so you feel that. This is not just an action movie. Yes, there are great moments of action. Matt pulls off the action. No question about that. But what I really appreciated even more than that was that you get to know these characters. It's the quiet moments you appreciate. It's the dialogue between characters. It's Bruce Wayne's kind of, moments where when we see him with these separate members of the Rogues Gallery. Carmine Falcone is one that springs to mind. And then he's got this fascinating kind of, not demographic, but dynamic with Alfred. Alfred's always been an interesting character, and I don't know him so well from the comics, but I know Alfred from Batman 66, you know, Batman 89, that franchise, and The Dark Knight with Michael Caine and all of them. And I mean, as a kid, I just saw him as this old English butler, but he's got a huge history in the forces. And I think in some iterations, he was even a spy. So you really get that with this portrayal of Alfred. And it's a very, very interesting relationship. If I went deeper into that relationship, I would go into spoiler territory. And then you've got this version of Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. There's so many ways you can get Catwoman wrong if you misunderstand her. For example, some people, like in the 60s TV series, she was a pure villain. I mean, there was the Batman 66 movie where there is a kind of romance where she pretends to be Kitka and she seduces Bruce Wayne and all of that. And I think that was done very well. But there is this kind of great foundation built between Selina and Bruce and Batman, if you like. But we do get to know her. We get to know how she struggled through her life, where she is. And, she's involved with the criminal element as well. And so you're going to see it. It's a really great performance. But like everything and everyone in this movie, Matt and his co-writer have done a great job in developing her. And she's so good. And I think she's going to be your favourite live action version of Selina Kyle. Prior to this movie, I think we all loved Michelle Pfeiffer as Selina Kyle and Catwoman. I mean, I'll never forget when she falls to her death and the cats are licking her and all of that. But I don't think that's campy and I don't think that's wrong. But Reeves has chosen another way to go at this character. And I think you're really, really going to like her. But the premise of this movie, as I've mentioned before, is very, very Godfather-like. And you do get that feel. Even though it's kind of, it is a noir detective movie, as he promised, Matt Reeves, from the very beginning. But there's different elements to this film. The element of the Riddler being this serial killer, but he's a serial killer who's not just killing for the hell of it. He's not just a psychopath. I think the novelization is very interesting if you read it, and I have read portions of it. You probably should check out the YouTube channel Boba Talks, because he really got into it for about half hour, 45 minutes in a video. I wish I could unpackage stuff as well as Boba does. I would have a much more popular YouTube channel, but his talents are different to mine. But this film is allowed to breathe. These characters are allowed to breathe. You get, as I say, the quiet moments, but then the action. For example, one of the things I like is this muscle car version of the Batmobile. This is the first version we're going to see of Rob Pattinson's Batman's Batmobile. And it's so awesome. And how he's designed this car, how he's built this car up. There's been so many different versions of the Batmobile. I mean, it's still astounding to me that Christopher Nolan didn't want to have a Batmobile, and Warner Brothers said to him, you see, it's good sometimes when studios do interfere. And he said, well, Matt, people want Chris, people expect the Batmobile. But he didn't want to do a traditional Batmobile because he felt it was camping. But the Tumbler was a great idea. The original 66 Batmobile in the series is also awesome. Burton's Batmobile is also awesome. I love Snyder's Batmobile as well. There's never really been a bad Batmobile, if you ask me. But this is a more grittier, reality-based first version of the Batmobile. And this motor can really run at speed. And it's really awesome to see this. And it's all about Reeves' take, making things a bit more touchable. And Zack Snyder and Nolan at times have been criticized for doing this. But Matt Reeves has done this. And so that's an interesting element as well. If you're patient with your movies and you can sit down and you can enjoy a character fleshed out, a character developed story, mixed in with some great action and some great set pieces, you're going to have a good time with this movie. This movie is utterly frightening and it's shocking. And it goes in a direction that I don't think any of us ever expected it to go. When Matt Reeves is attached to a movie, you know his values as a storyteller, a writer, and a director. But I was very, very shocked about the shocking moments in the film, and you will as well. When you come out the cinema, you will be breathless, and you will be wanting more. You will be looking forward to the HBO Max spin-offs, Gotham PD, the Penguin prequel, and a lot more stuff that Matt, WB, and HBO Max will be announcing. But they're already developing the Batman sequel. So Matt Reeves is very hard at work already fleshing out the next chapters of the BatVerse. There's actually an article about the BatVerse in the beginning of the BatVerse, which I will read. I think it's from comicbook.com very, very shortly. So this is a hugely satisfying film. I think this film was made by a Bat stan for Bat stans. That doesn't mean if you've never watched a Batman film or never picked up a Batman comic, you're going to be confused. No, everything is explained in layman's terms, but the riddles are very, very complicated. And if you work out any of these riddles, please let me know. I'll be going live a little bit later on. Maybe we can talk about that, because we're going to be talking probably at least until we see Black Adam about this movie. But this is a movie that redefines the CBM. And I feel after you see this movie, it may be difficult for you to watch a movie that doesn't do very much. For example, in comparison, a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. Cameos and Easter eggs are no longer going to be enough for you. You see, cameos and Easter eggs are fun, and I'm looking forward to it in the new DC Cinematic Universe, but they're still going to make good films as well as having them. But I think if you've just got films that rely on cameos and Easter eggs and gags, after you've seen this film, it's simply not going to be good enough. This is another classic movie that redefines the CBM along the lines of Superman the movie that was hugely revolutionary. Like Batman 89, hugely revolutionary. The Dark Knight, revolutionary again. The Joker movie, and for some, Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice, hugely revolutionary. There is a long list of groundbreaking comic book movies in, the Warner Brothers warehouse. And Marvel doesn't have this. Marvel makes movies to make money. WB make movies, make art. And this is the difference I've been trying to explain to people for a long time. So that is my non-spoiler review of the Batman. Now, obviously, tomorrow you're not going to get like huge spoiler reviews. So I will hold off for my spoiler review. But this is a 5 out of 5 movie. This is a historic movie, a historic moment for the character of Batman, but just not that. It's a historic, ground-changing moment in the CBM. And for me, what happens next is so extremely exciting. Now let's go to this journalist called Hammond from Deadline. Somehow his review, the non-spoilery review or reaction for the Batman, was leaked. It's now been deleted. So this is what he had to say. Hammond also said he never checked his watch once and couldn't believe it was 3 hours, despite being so deliberately paced. He said the Batmobile chase might be the best ever. The whole cast delivers, and this Batman is the darkest, grittiest, and most character-driven yet. Leaked review of the Batman from Deadline's chief film critic Peter Hammond. It's a winner, a detective movie for the ages, and Robert Pattinson is perfect. And remember the reaction to him being cast. It's okay to raise your eyebrows when someone's cast. I was like, wow, But I didn't hate the idea because I've seen his movies, all his movies. But I mean, even as a young man in the Twilight Saga, he did a good job. I mean, those films are not for me, but it doesn't mean he was a bad actor just because he was in them. He is a great choice. He is a new Batman. He does love the character, and that shines through. The Batman's BatVerse Explained, Gotham PD, the Penguin spin-offs, by Cameron Bonomolo of Comic Book. The BatVerse begins with The Batman, the mystery thriller about a vengeful Bruce Wayne, Robert Pattinson, in year 2 of his costume crime-fighting crusade. Reveals the origins of Batman's rogues gallery, Catwoman Zoe Kravitz, Penguin Colin Farrell, and the Riddler. Paul Dano, part of the expanding Batverse built around filmmaker Matt Reeves' reboot. It's not a reboot because it's in a different universe than Ben Affleck's version. The characters have a future in planned sequels and 2 announced spin-off series being developed at HBO Max. Like Earth 2 of the comic books, the Batman begins a new world separate from the DC Extended Universe where Ben Affleck has donned the cape and cowl of a more experienced Batman. On one Earth, you have Wonder Woman Gal Gadot, the Aquaman's Jason Momoa, and the Flash's Ezra Miller as the Justice League, and you can continue telling these stories. While on another Earth, you can have a more grounded, real Year 2 Batman. Walter Hamada, president of DC Films, said at DC Fandom 2020, there is that one Earth, that greater Earth with this existing Justice League, and another that's sort of happening with that Year 2 Batman. And of course, there's outliers like Joker that don't exist on either Earth. But that's okay, Matt Reeves can continue to build out his Gotham. All are part of the wider DC multiverse, which will lead to some timeline changes when Michael Keaton's Batman returns in The Flash. Over in the standalone Batverse, Reeves executive produces 2 untitled spin-offs for HBO Max, one about the Gotham City Police Department and another about Oswald Oz Cobblepot's power grab as the Penguin. Can't wait for that. The Gotham PD series is set in the world Reeves created for the Batman and builds on its examination, where are we? To extend, let's go, I've lost this, sorry, across multiple platforms. Yeah, Gotham PD is a series set in the world Reeves created for the Batman and builds on its examination of the anatomy of corruption in Gotham City, ultimately launching a new Batman universe across multiple platforms. HBO Max said when announcing the spin-off in 2020, the series provides an unprecedented opportunity to extend the world established in the movie and further explore the myriad of compelling and complex characters of Gotham. Jeffrey Wright, who plays Lieutenant Jim Gordon in The Batman, recently exclusively told Comic Book there have been some conversations about Gordon's role in the series. Set in the first year of Batman's crusade, the spin-off from showrunner Joe Barton, Gil Hadji, acts as a prequel to The Batman, but it's currently unknown if Pattinson's Shadow Vigilante will appear. He won't be the star of the show, but I think he'll be around. It's interesting. The idea of the story was a story in which Gotham has that sort of depth of corruption, and then the idea that we could actually do a series that is going deeper into an aspect of it, which in this case is the corrupt police department and the inner workings of the city. Reeves revealed of the GCPD series during DC Fandom's event. The idea is we go back to year 1, and year 1 is the beginning of the emergence of Batman and is the first appearance of this masked vigilante that starts to unsettle the city. You start to see the story through the point of view of these corrupt cops, and one in particular, and the story is actually a battle for his soul. The Farrell-led Penguin spin-off following Cobblepot's rise to power in Gotham's criminal underworld and was envisioned by Reeves as being this kind of American dream in Gotham sort of story. Almost like Scarface, the rise of this character who we all know will achieve mythic status, he previously told Entertainment Weekly. Lauren LaFranc, Impulse, Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., is writing the script. Now that's an interesting person to get to do it. What I really wanted this movie to do is create a Batverse, Reeves told EW of the Batman. You don't do a story and go, this is chapter 1, because you might not get to do chapter 2. So the story had to stand on its own. But the thing about it is that the Batworld is so rich with character that as you're starting to come to an end, you can already start thinking about the next thing, because the idea, of course, is that Gotham's story never ends. So that's a really, really good article. So there you can see this grounded, expanded universe that Matt Reeves is building in his Earth 2 of his BatVerse. It's very, very exciting. We will expand on talking about the Penguin a little bit later on as well. But yeah, this is a huge moment for DC live action. Robert Pattinson reveals unusual comics that inspired his Batman. Robert Pattinson reveals the unusual comics that inspired his new take on The Dark Knight, including the 1989 storyline Batman Shaman by Adam Banks of Screen Rant. The Batman's Robert Pattinson reveals the unusual comics that inspired his new iteration of The Dark Knight. What was once a solo movie for Ben Affleck's Cape Crusader set in the DCEU has now morphed into a standalone entry. This is slowly starting its own BatVerse, evidenced by the Penguin spin-off series coming to HBO Max and the early talks of a sequel. Other than Pattinson as the Dark Knight, the film will introduce Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, Paul Dano as the Riddler, Jeffrey Wright as Lieutenant Gordon, Andy Serkis as Alfred Pennyworth, and Colin Farrell as the Penguin. As with every major superhero film, there has been much discussion about which specific comics inspired the Batman. For the movie's grounded and gritty tone, writer-director Matt Reeves drew from Batman Year One for the serial killer side of the story, which involves the Riddler targeting Gotham's elite. Reeves was inspired by both The Long Halloween and its sequel Dark Victory, while also taking inspiration from the real-life Zodiac Killer. Reeves and Pattinson also looked to Batman Ego to get a sense of the effect these killings have on Bruce Wayne psychologically. So as you can see, Matt didn't take from one specific graphic novel, he took from a few, and he was really focusing, of the comics of the early days, which I think is great. Now in an interview with EW, Pattinson revealed some additional comics that inspired his take on the character. Beyond the more obvious fare, he looked to more unusual stories like Batman Shaman and to a lesser extent, The Man Who Falls. The former responsible for inspiring how Pattinson moved in his suit and helped the actor get a sense of why the GCPD willfully permits a masked vigilante to examine active crime scenes. Read what Pattinson had to say about the Batman, Shaman, Billa. It's almost a dream state the whole time. I was like, oh, that hasn't really been touched on. There's a kind of mysticism to it. In other iterations of the suit, because of the way you move, you kind of have to be more of a tank. And in this one, it felt like it was such a shock how smoothly you can move. You kind of end up moving like more of a wraith. There's a scene right in the beginning of the movie where I'm kind of crouching over, investigating this dead body, and I really wanted it to feel like a sort of druid. I was trying to play that, trying to think, how can you be a detective when you are wearing this outfit, which is the opposite of a detective? I thought it's kind of like he's a witch doctor more than anything else. And the more you get it right, the more the police believe him. And so they start letting him into crime scenes and stuff. It's very, very similar to how Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, was allowed to examine evidence and stuff because he's smarter than the police, and so is Batman. Written by Dennis O'Neil, illustrated by Ed Hannigan and John Beatty, Batman Shaman was first published in 1989 and follows Bruce Wayne years before he dons the cape and cowl. In the comic, Bruce is injured while training in the Alaskan mountains and is rescued by a local shaman who heals him with an ancient tale of how bats gain the ability to fly. Years later, this myth plays an important role in inspiring Bruce to become Batman. Since Reeves' movie opts to reboot the franchise, it's not a reboot, it's on a different Earth. They haven't rebooted Ben Affleck without rehashing Batman's well-known origin story, and instead begins during his second year of crime fighting in Gotham. Pattinson had to do some homework to get into the character's headspace and understand his motivations. Of course, Rob already knows the motivations of this character because he's a huge stan. For the first suiting up, Batman Shaman is much less grounded than Reeves' film due to its mysticism, but its lesser-known backstory should provide an interesting basis for Pattinson's distinct take on the character in the Batman. So very, very interesting again there Matt and Rob looking to the early comics and the early iterations from Bill Finger and Bob Kane. And I think that's very important to, if you're doing this and you are setting up this BatVerse, to look at the beginning, to look at how Bill Finger, you know, and the other guy who I just mentioned, who's Bob Kane, you know, kind of looked at this character. I mean, Batman is a groundbreaking creation. He's always going to be around because he's such a fascinating character. The Batman's Penguin spin-off show could be R-rated, says Colin Farrell. Colin Farrell discusses the Batman's upcoming Penguin spin-off series, saying the show could be R-rated TVMA when it releases on HBO Max by Josh Planisi of Screen Rant. Colin Farrell discusses the Batman's upcoming Penguin spin-off, saying the show could be R-rated TVMA when it releases on HBO Max. Inspired by the Year One comic storyline, Matt Reeves' gritty reboot, here we go again, the Batman focuses on Bruce Wayne's second year as Gotham's vigilante. The film follows Batman as he investigates serial of murders of the city's elites. The Noir thriller stars Robert Pattinson, Batman, Zoe Kravitz, Catwoman, Jeffrey Wright, Lieutenant James Gordon, Andy Serkis, Alfred Pennyworth, Paul Dano's Riddler, John Turturro's Carmine Falcone, and Farrell's Oswald Oz Cobblepot. Farrell's big screen iteration of the Gotham gangster follows Danny DeVito's portrayal in Tim Burton's Batman Returns in 1992, where DeVito's Oz leaned into his flamboyant and bird-like mantle. Farrell's take is more grounded in the line with Reeves' perspective. BatVerse, despite Penguin's minor supporting role in the Batman, which positions Dano's Riddler as its main antagonist, Farrell has been getting a lot of attention for looking unrecognizable with heavy prosthetics, makeup, and a fat suit. Piggybacking off this hype, a Gotham City Police Department and Penguin spin-off series for HBO Max were announced late last year. The latter project currently lacks a title and release window, but Reeves will serve as executive producer and screenwriter. Lauren LaFranc, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., is penning the script. In an interview with Rotten Tomatoes, Farrell discussed his character in The Batman and how the film will set up his spin-off. While talking about Reeves' script and what drew him to Oz, Farrell hinted Penguin may operate under an R rating on HBO Max. Read the full quote below. His ambition and his vulnerability, his humour, I mean, it was just the tip of the iceberg in this film for me. But there were little moments in the scripts that Matt wrote in relation to Oz, little bits of humour and an awkwardness as well. And his origin, you know why? He is the man he is, and all of that stuff. If we get 6 to 8 hours to do it, I just think the character could be endlessly fun and fascinating and brutal. I hear that we're going to be allowed to kind of do an R-rated version, perhaps. Wow, which would be nice to explore the violence, and that could permit perhaps, and the darkness that could allow us to explore. So all of those things, very exciting, isn't it? The Batman received an official MPAA rating of PG-13 back in January, citing violent and disturbing content, drug content, and strong language, alongside other suggestive material. Given the Batman's gritty nature, many fans hoped the film would secure a stricter age classification. I never wanted it to be R-rated anyway. However, Reeves has since explained that Batman does not have an R-rated cut, as he wants as many people to see his film as possible. Makes sense, and so did the studio. Something a more mature rating, of course, would limit. That being said, the sky seems to be the limit on HBO Max and other streaming services, where TVMA comic book shows like Peacemaker, Doom Patrol, and Watchmen continue to thrive. Farrell and Reeves have compared Penguin to Fredo Corleone in The Godfather. I have compared the movie to The Godfather, and there you have it, from the horse's mouth. And The Godfather Part 2. In The Batman, Oz is a foot soldier of Carmine Falcone and has yet to become the Penguin. Irrespective of his ambition, he isn't taken seriously by his associates. Producer Dylan Clark has said the spin-off will chart Oz's rise to power, similar to Scarface's Tony Montana. The gangster comparisons reinforce the idea that the Penguin spin-off will need a mature and violent series to do its titular character justice. Furthermore, Farrell was only allowed to smoke a cigar in The Batman, but could sport Penguin's iconic cigarette holder in HBO Max. I think the smoking element is important. It comes with the character as well. But this is an example of the huge detail and fleshing out that Matt Reeves is doing with his brand new Bat universe. Be excited. The Batman star thinks there are probably too many superhero movies. There are a lot of superhero movies and nothing else. This is the lack of variety I keep on complaining about, as much as I like live action superhero content. The Batman star Peter Sarsgaard has expressed that he thinks there are too many superhero movies and says other films suffer due to them. Yes, this is true. That's a fact. And it's a shame because Hollywood just want to go for what makes money. They're not interested in the art form anymore. That's a shame. By Christian Hodge of Screen Rant. The Batman star Peter Sarsgaard thinks there are probably too many superhero movies. Sarsgaard will be appearing in The Batman as Gil Coulson, Gotham's shady district attorney. Matt Reeves' upcoming DCEU film, it's not a DCEU film, will mark the first appearance of the Caped Crusader outside of the DCEU. Since Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice in 2016, in addition to Sarsgaard, the Batman stars Robert Pattinson as the Dark Knight, Paul Dano as Riddler, Zoe Kravitz as Selina Kyle, Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon, and Colin Farrell as Penguin. Despite his deep interest in art house thrillers and experimental theatre, Sarsgaard is no stranger to the superhero genre. Besides his role in The Batman, Sarsgaard has also appeared as the villain Hector Hammond in 2011's Green Lantern. And let me tell you, you know, a lot of people don't like this movie, but Sarsgaard's performance was actually one of the greatest things about that movie. Sarsgaard is married to Maggie Gyllenhaal, who starred in one of the century's most influential superhero films, The Dark Knight. It wasn't that amazing how she got that role. You know, it was played by someone else in the first movie, and she was replaced, and that was strange, wasn't it? But you know, she played a pivotal role in The Dark Knight, and she did really well. While Gyllenhaal's brother Jake starred as the villain Mysterio in Spider-Man Far From Home, due to these connections, Sarsgaard certainly is familiar with the genre that has come to dominate the industry over the last decade and a half. In a recent interview with The Guardian, Sarsgaard has stated that he believes that cinemas have become oversaturated with superhero films. He's not wrong, of course, as Marvel released several MCU films a year, while DC continues to release both DCEU films and films like The Batman, which take place outside of it. Sarsgaard stands by his opinion that many actors would rather be doing other types of work, but superhero films are what sells. According to Sarsgaard, he often jokes with his wife that they could be doing experimental theatre in some socialist country. However, he also believes that an artist wants to share their work with the largest number of people. So his full quote below, it's kind of funny, isn't it? You know, he's being all moralistic about too many superhero movies, but why don't you go to a socialist country and just perform the art form? Because you want to make money and you want to be seen. It's a bit hypocritical if you ask me. Anyway, he makes a good point, but it's true what he's saying. I've always wondered if there were no money in playing superheroes, whether actors would still be as drawn to them. But there's also the idea that we could do the most obscure, interesting thing in a basement somewhere. I joke with my wife that one day we'll just do experimental theatre in some socialist country, and yet you want to share what you do with the largest number of people. Sarsgaard has also gone on to speak about how the success of the superhero blockbusters harm the success of other films. It's true. Engineers that he connects to. When the Batman hits theatres, cinemas around the world, will be flooded with screenings likely showing the film on several screens within one location. This, of course, does not leave room for much else to reach audiences during this time. And this is another great point, and Disney do this a lot. They oversaturate their movies in cinemas and don't give anything else a chance. And, you know, Quentin Tarantino has made this point very eloquently. Sarsgaard recently took on a role in the film The Lost Daughter, which was helmed by his wife, Gyllenhaal. While the film has done relatively well, even being nominated for 3 Academy Awards, Sarsgaard does wonder if anyone would have seen the film if it had the misfortune to open alongside The Batman. Despite this, Sarsgaard still chose to participate in The Batman, and he has a message to other actors considering doing superhero film. If you're going to do one, you better be damn sure Matt Reeves is directing it. This is a great point, isn't it? Because Matt Reeves brings a seriousness and a respectability to this genre. Sarsgaard's concerns certainly echo those of many filmgoers who aren't interested in what studios like Marvel and DC have to offer. It has become increasingly difficult to find art house style films in theatres. though they have in more recent years found a home on streaming services, of course. One could make the argument that while superhero films dominate the theatre, it is the art house films that get recognised by institutions like the Academy Awards. Many fans were disappointed earlier this year to find that mega hit Spider-Man No Way Home was only nominated for a Best Visual Effects Oscar. Despite this, Sarsgaard seems to feel quite passionately about the direction that Reeves has decided to take the Batman, which may indicate that the film will be able to bridge the gap between these two sensibilities in filmmaking. There's no question. Sarsgaard makes a very, very good point. Martin Scorsese's made this point. A lot of people who care about the art are making this point, and I care about the art. As a writer, as a trained actor, as a trained filmmaker, I care about the art. And they're oversaturating the industry in America with superhero content. Now that's fun, but you've got to have a variety. And when you don't do that, you're killing your own art. Matt Reeves talks about how he would introduce Superman into his Batverse. Now, this is something he was asked. He didn't come up with this on his own. I covered it on my live last night, but let's do it properly without having to answer to comments at the same time, because I want to focus on this. How the Batman director would introduce Superman into Batverse. The Batman director, Matt Reeves, says that he could only introduce Superman into his Batverse if he were the only fantastical element of the film. I think Superman has got a very exciting future in Matt Reeves' Earth 2. And I think he's going to write and direct a movie, as I keep on saying to you. And I think that might come from an introduction in one of these Batman movies, or it may just be self-contained away from this. It's very interesting, he said, if he was the only fantastical character in the Batverse, or, see, this shows to me that he's only really interested in doing a Superman story apart from fleshing out his Batman universe. Interesting. This is by Paul Shurey, a screenwriter. The Batman director, Matt Reeves, explains how he would introduce Superman into his Batverse. Reeves is the latest filmmaker to tackle the character of Batman in a solo film, with Robert Pattinson taking over the iconic role in a non-DCEU connected standalone feature. The last solo Bat film to grace theatrical screens was Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises, with actor Christian Bale in the role. Since that time, Batman has appeared in team-up films, the latest of which were Zack Snyder's Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, Justice League, both which starred Ben Affleck under the cowl. Batman v Superman is the first time that both Batman and Superman appeared in a feature film together, which continued in Justice League. Henry Cavill has played the most recent DCEU version of Superman, starting with Man of Steel in 2013. There are multiple Superman-themed projects in the works, but it's unclear if any of them would involve the character interacting with Batman in any capacity. Interestingly, Reeves' The Batman operates in its own Batverse, which is separate from the same DCEU, where BVS and Justice League took place, meaning it may or may not have superpowered beings. So the Batverse doesn't have superpowered beings mostly, right? But that Earth 2, it's got these DC characters populating it. We just haven't met them yet. That's all it is. Sometimes these journalists refuse to say things in the right way because they like to go into a sensationalist route. But I'm always going to be direct and honest with you and tell you things in layman's terms so we get each other, so we understand what's truly going on. Because misinterpreting what a director is saying or wants to do isn't a good thing. Talking to Collider, Reeves was asked if Superman existed in his Batverse, or if not, how he could be introduced. Reeves went on to explain that his take on the Batman, as well as Cloverfield and his Potter films, was to be as grounded as possible, by focusing only on one fantastical element, to have everything else revolve around so that it could feel emotionally real, and to make everything feel very believable. The director said that the introduction of an alien like Superman would be a shock to that universe. The only way he could potentially make something like that work would be to shift the one fantastical element to be about the introduction of a superpowered being, such as Superman, rather than simply have him show up in this practical, believable version of Batman. Reeves says that if the challenge presented itself, he'd ultimately have to do it through the same lens as the Batman. Here's his full quote. Look, we should be so lucky that this is a world that people embrace, that they say, oh my God, we want to see what would happen when those things collide. I think that if that challenge ever presents itself, it would be an exciting one to explore. So he's not discounting Superman. This is interesting. But I'd have to try and do it through this lens. You know what I mean? And that is absolutely right. That at the moment, to me, this world is the place that I want to focus. So very, very interesting. When he talks about this world, he talks about the groundedness. So you're talking about a grounded Superman. This is why I'm desperate for this man to do a Superman movie. The Superman projects currently in the works both involve a black version of the character with no clear agenda on whether or not Cavill's version will appear again. J.J. Abrams and Ta-Nehisi Coates are working to bring a reported reboot of Kal-El as a black Superman to the big screen. We haven't heard anything about that for over 6 months, which is very suspicious to me. Let's see what's going on with that. While Michael B. Jordan is working on a miniseries for Val Zod, an alternate dimension Superman, recently the current DCEU version of Superman appeared in a shadow and without Cavill in the suit for a scene in HBO Max's Peacemaker. But as far as any future appearances go, little is known. By the way, that was Cavill's Superman, played by Double. That's all that happened there. It's Cavill's Superman in Peacemaker. Reeves' take on how to introduce Superman into his BatVerse is not all that dissimilar to Zack Snyder's version, which treated Kal-El's arrival like an alien invasion that changed everything, rather than just ushering the character in without explanation. By that token, a Superman in Reeves' BatVerse is entirely possible, but it sounds like the director is keen to focus on the characters within the Batman's world, particularly Gotham City, even by the standards of all the previous Batman films. There's still a ton of Batman mythology, characters and locations to explore well before it ventures that the rest of the DC universe. So, Reeves sticking to the BatVerse for the time being is a welcome venture. Yeah, I don't think this is a competition what he should do. It's not this or that, and this is the generation we live in now, the this or that generation. Probably, after he finishes with his Batman trilogy and fleshing all that out, he'll start to do a Superman universe, a Superman world in Earth 2, and that should excite everyone. It excites me. I'm the only one really talking about it, but he's obviously very interested in doing a Superman movie. Batgirl releases on HBO Max in December 2022, hints the Batman producer. Batman producer Michael Uslan's latest Facebook post may have indicated that Batgirl will be released on HBO Max sometime in December of 2022 by Richard Fink of Screen Rant. The release window for Batgirl has possibly been revealed by one of the producers of The Batman, directed by Adil Earl and Arby and Billa Falah, Bad Boys for Life, which was a great movie. Batgirl is set to star Leslie Grace in The Heights as Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, who is the daughter of Commissioner Gordon, and follows Barbara's adventure as a superhero and pit her against Firefly, played by Brendan Fraser. The film is set to be released on HBO Max, opposed to theatres like the other DCEU movies. While set in the DCEU, Batgirl will not feature an appearance by Ben Affleck's Batman. Actually, you don't even know if Affleck's Batman's going to be in that movie, so don't discount him just because Keaton's going to be in it. But instead, Michael Keaton's Batman from 1989's Batman and 92's Batman Returns. Keaton will reprise his role as the Caped Crusader in The Flash, which is slated for release in November of 2022 and is set to alter the entire DCEU. Filming is currently underway for Batgirl, which started in November 2021. While no wrap date is set, it is highly believed the film will be released on HBO Max sometime in 2022, but when exactly remains the question. It appears the date may be more in focus as Michael Uslan, who has been a producer on all Batman-related projects since 89's Batman, including the upcoming The Batman, made a post on Facebook, which he may have hinted at when HBO Max will release Batgirl. Uslan showcased a photo of Batman's shadow and commented on how Keaton's Batman will return in November, which is the confirmed release date for The Flash, but also mentioned December, indicating Batgirl could be released in December. No official release date has been announced by Warner Brothers or HBO Max at this time. You would expect Michael Uslan to know this, and even though there's no reason for me to doubt him, I still have a little niggling suspicion that this date could change and be pushed to 2023. Wow, 5 DCEU, or not 5 DCEU movies, but 5 DC live action movies this year is a huge treat. And ain't we spoiled as DC fans for the first time in a long time. So I want to see it. It's a very ambitious movie. I'm excited for it. I think it deserves a theatrical run, but that's just my opinion. A December release date seems plausible, as it will be right after The Flash, and one imagines the involvement of Keaton means they cannot release it until after that film. Exactly. In December, that makes Batgirl the 6th DC movie set to be released in 2022, and the first one exclusively for HBO Max. It also will mark the second DC film for the release that December, as Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom is set to open in theatres on December 16th, 2022. Releasing 2 DC films in December, even on 2 separate platforms, is a risky move, and one that could cause the 2 films to cannibalize each other. I don't agree. In terms of audience, or be beneficial and serve as a boost to both, with Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom being the studio's big holiday tentpole, and Batgirl as the streaming release over the holidays. I actually think it's good. You get attention on your streaming service and in movie theatres with Aquaman too. This release date window could always change, as it is entirely possible Warner Brothers may delay Batgirl to 2023. I agree, as to not release too many DC films in one year. Currently, only 2 DC films are set for 2023, which is interesting. Shazam! Fury of the Gods, we discussed this before, on June the 2nd, and Blue Beetle on August the 16th. There are no current release dates for planned DC films like Wonder Twins, Metal Men, Zatanna, or Black Canary. Batgirl's HBO Max release could tie into a major holiday in the early part of 2023, like Valentine's Day or even March the 8th, to commemorate International Women's Day. Why? I know she's a woman, but you know, why? Which was beneficial to the release of Captain Marvel in 2019. Oh, give me a break. Either way, audiences will get to see Batgirl on HBO Max sometime soon. Yeah, it's interesting. You would expect Uslan knows what he's talking about. He's talking about November for The Flash, then that movie in December. Listen, I want to see all these DC movies in one year. But I think the film Batgirl deserves a theatrical release, and I'm still holding out a little hope that that movie gets its cinematic release. And finally today, we talk about John Cena and why he wanted Peacemaker to be bisexual. This is by Brennan Klein of Screen Rant. John Cena discusses why he's enthusiastic about James Gunn's decision to make Peacemaker bisexual and how the series deepens the character. John Cena discusses his enthusiasm over the decision to make his Peacemaker character bisexual. Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker, is relatively a minor DC Comics character who came to the fore in James Gunn's DCEU sequel, The Suicide Squad, which hit theatres and HBO Max in August 2021. That film introduced Cena as the patriotic, irreverent anti-hero who got his own HBO Max series spin-off just 5 months later. The show was able to make such a quick turnaround because of the film's COVID-19 related release delays, allowing Gunn and company to produce Peacemaker during the year that the film was in limbo. Peacemaker Season 1, which ran on HBO Max from January 13th through February the 17th, was written by Gunn, who also directed 5 of its 8 episodes. During its run, Peacemaker explored Christopher Smith's origins and deepened audiences' perceptions of the humorous off-kilter character. Although it wasn't made explicitly clear over the course of the season, there were several references to the character being DC's first queer superhero. Well, he's half queer, isn't he? And these are half measures. But when you make a character bisexual, a lot of gay people I talk to, and I'm not talking about bisexual people, but gay people are kind of offended by this because they see it as half measures. Anyway, there were several references to the character being DC's first queer superhero, including a post-coital moment depicting him in bed with both Amber Allison Araya and vigilante Freddie Stormer. Finally, Gunn confirmed in a recent interview that Peacemaker is indeed bisexual. While speaking with people, Cena discusses his enthusiasm over Gunn's decision to incorporate Peacemaker's bisexuality as an element of the show. Although the filmmaker has previously given Cena credit for the decision, he gives the credit right back to his director, saying that he just wanted this guy to have so much about himself to figure out. He celebrates the way that the character unfolds over the course of the series because there's more to Peacemaker than there initially seems at first. He says, we see a bad guy with no redeemable qualities, but when you dive into Peacemaker, the series, you see a human being that is like all of the rest of us. Read his full quote below. I think ultimately that was James Gunn's choice. I know he's given me the credit for that. I just wanted this guy to have so much about himself to figure out. On the surface, he appears to be what you see is what you get. And I think a lot of the audience who had seen the Suicide Squad when we announced that there was a Peacemaker spin-off, a lot of them were upset because their first impression was their total impression. What we see is what we get. We see a bad guy with no redeemable qualities. But when you dive into Peacemaker, the series, you see a human being that is like all of the rest of us. We are using our time here to simply try to figure out what the hell is going on. I thought that was a very unique added dimension, especially because of the snap judgment first impression you get when looking at the Peacemaker character. I've got to give James the credit for grabbing the ball and running with it. What I like most about it is just it allows the audience to come to their own conclusions, and that's okay. Very much of our show certainly approaches a lot of sensitive subject matter, but it simply just is. Again, it allowed the audience to make their own conclusions. So I haven't seen Peacemaker. It looks like it's up to you. If you want him to be bi, he's bi. If not, it doesn't matter. So it's not blatantly there either, which also can be something that can upset, the gay community as well. Why not blatantly say he's bisexual if that's what you want him to be? Cena and Gunn certainly seem to be on the same page with the character. The wrestler turned actor, wrestlers are actors anyway, turned actor throws his all into bringing Peacemaker to life. Even when the character is at his most outrageous, from the absurd choreography of the show's opening credits to the bombastic twists and turns of the finale, he's committed to the roller coaster ride of the show. Hopefully, Peacemaker Season 2 will explore even more about the character and make his bisexuality a specifically expressed element. Yeah, because you either go there or you don't. Peacemaker is a huge hit for HBO Max, even nabbing the streamer's highest rated single day rating ever for its finale. Now that Warner Brothers and HBO have even more confidence in the story, they'll likely give Gunn carte blanche for how he handles the character in the future. They haven't interfered with anything that Gunn's done with the Suicide Squad or with Peacemaker. As I say, if you want this character to be bisexual, make him bisexual, make him out and proud. Don't say, well, it's up to you. No. You're just trying not to upset people. If you're going to do it, just do it. But I'm happy with what happened with Peacemaker. People have spoiled me. I wanted them to spoil me. I'm excited to see it. And the future of this wonderful DC live action universe just gets more and more exciting as I read about it and I hear about it. This has been the DCEU Daily. I'm Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this perfection. And I'll see you again when I go live later on. Until then, au revoir, goodbye, auf Wiedersehen. See you again later. Till then, goodbye.